What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the BlitzCity Podcast. I'm your host, Kobe Orr. Happy Wednesday. I hope y'all are having a great and safe week so far. Guys, we are just a few days away from the Southern Heritage Classic, the last Southern Heritage Classic as we know it, between a Tennessee State team that is much improved from last year, who's hungry. Offensively, they look great, and the juggernaut that is Jackson State. This is a very intriguing matchup. I'm going to tell you why I believe Jackson State still has way too much for Tennessee State to overcome, and why I believe they should win by 2 touchdowns. But first, I have to give acknowledge to Tennessee State and let y'all know 2 players on that roster you need to be looking out for who could potentially bust this game open. Now, for Tennessee State, those 2 players are Draylen Ellis at the quarterback position. Draylen Ellis is the Austin Peay transfer. Jalen Ellis is exactly what Eddie George needed to run that balanced yet up-tempo offense for Tennessee State. The guy's electric. He can run, he can pass. As a matter of fact, against the number 13 ranked team in the country, who most likely is higher now, he was 17 for 27, 252 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's solid production. On the ground, I think he put up more than 50 yards rushing, as well as adding a touchdown to that as well. Draylen Ellis is that guy. The other dude is the all-conference running back, all OVC. 25 attempts, over 200 yards rushing. That is Mr. Devon Starling. Now, Devon didn't even start last week for reasons that Eddie George would not disclaim, but he did finish that game with a big impact. Those are 2 guys who can really bust the game wide open for their respective teams if things go their way. But let me tell you why I believe it won't go their way, right? We know how overwhelming Jackson State is offensively. Defensively, they're just as overwhelming. When it comes to Tennessee State, they've improved a lot offensively. Defensively, I'm not impressed. I'm not sold. And that's no diss to them. It's just what I've seen versus, last week versus the Eagles. Now, last week, their defense had a lot of injuries. As a matter of fact, I think 5 key players on that defense at some point or another was injured. 1 cornerback, 2 linebackers, 2 nose tackles. All right. On top of that, 2 of them returned to the game, to be fair, so you can expect them last week. But if I'm just looking at the other 3 guys, I don't really know if a nagging injury is the best thing to have when going up against this high-powered offense of Jackson State. I just don't know. All credit to them. They still do have Kavon Pope, the Ohio State transfer who went viral last year because he took his stuff off, quit during the game, said I'm done, ended up going to an HBCU. Could have been Jackson State, potentially. Coach Prime said he didn't really want a guy like that on the team. So now we're here, and oddly enough, they get to see each other Saturday. Now, the other reason that I think Jackson State is just way too overwhelming, the Tennessee State defense only got 1 sack. You did not get any pressure all game. You only got 1 sack. On top of that, you allowed that QB, who, granted, waited 6 years to start, so he's experienced, right? But waited 6 years to start, no game time. You allowed him to throw for 300 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. Sound familiar? Yeah, Shedeur Sanders. Now, if you allowed him to do that, why should I believe that you are going to just all of a sudden change things around against one of the top quarterbacks in the FCS? Why should I believe that? Why should I believe that with his wide receiver room? Because that ain't all. Not only did you allow for him to go off like that, you also allowed for that quarterback to connect with 11 different receivers from his wide receiver room. 11 different receivers. Now, we can all admit nobody is as loaded as Jackson State when it comes to wide receivers. So if you allow them to do that, what are you going to allow those 7 4-stars and 1 5-star in that wide receiver room from Jackson State to do? What are you going to allow them to do? How do you plan on stopping that? How? On top of that, Jackson State, I'll tell you what, you name me a team in the FCS, especially in the HBCU school, who can afford to leave their most dynamic playmaker of last season, Malachi Wideman, who scored at least in between 10 to 13 touchdowns, something crazy like that. You let me know a team who could afford to leave him home by choice. Also, another team who can afford to leave the number one JUCO prospect in the country, former 4-star recruit Dejon Nugget Warren, who could afford to leave him on the bench until the second half of an important game because they're so deep. You let me know who else can do that. Not a lot of schools. They're too loaded. They're too talented. For that reason, I believe this is going to be a win for Jackson State. I don't think this will be a 59-3 blowout because Tennessee State is impressive. They got a lot of size. They've always had a lot of size, this we know. But if Jackson State plays like how they did last week, it's not going to be close for long. At least 2 scores. That's my prediction. With that being said, you are watching the BlitzCity Podcast. I'm your host, Kobe Orr. I'm out. Peace.